It's strange how your own child can look you in the eye and make you feel like a stranger in your own home. My daughter, Emily, once told me, "Mom, you're too old to understand how the world works now." Those words, they broke something inside me that I didn't even know could still break at 65. Because I had spent my entire life understanding her moods, her dreams, her fears. And yet, in her eyes, I had become obsolete. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I live in a small town just outside Portland, Oregon. I'm a retired schoolteacher, 40 years of teaching English, watching generations of children grow up, guiding them, believing in them. But it seems when it came to my own daughter, I couldn't guide her anymore. Emily was 32. Smart, ambitious, with that fiery confidence only youth can carry. She worked in marketing for a tech startup in Seattle. We used to be close. She'd call me after work, tell me about her ideas, her frustrations. I was proud of her. She was everything I wanted her to be, until the day she started believing she didn't need me anymore. It began one summer afternoon when she came home for the weekend. The house smelled like apple pie and lavender candles, the way she always loved it growing up. I had been so excited. I even wore her favorite blue cardigan, the one she always said made me look warm and huggable. But the Emily who walked through that door wasn't the little girl who once ran into my arms. She barely looked up from her phone. "Hi, Mom," she said flatly, setting her designer bag on the couch. I asked her if she was eating well, sleeping enough, if she'd been seeing anyone. She rolled her eyes.
"Mom, please.
"I'm not 16.
Ai fine."
Her tone cut deep, but I tried to smile through it. You know that smile mothers wear when they're pretending everything's okay, when inside, their heart is quietly bleeding? That was me. Later that evening, she started talking about her big idea, quitting her job and starting her own online brand consultancy. She spoke with so much excitement, waving her hands, her voice full of certainty. And I listened, really listened before gently asking, "Emily, that sounds wonderful. But have you saved enough to take that risk?" She froze. Her smile vanished. Then she laughed bitterly. "Mom, you don't get it. This isn't the old days where you work one job your whole life and wait for retirement. The world's changed. You're too old to understand." Those words, I can still feel them echo in my chest. Too old to understand. I wanted to argue, to remind her how many times I'd picked her up when she fell, how every change she embraced was one I helped her face. But something inside me said, "Don't." So instead I said quietly, "All right, honey, maybe you're right." And that night, after she went to bed, I sat alone on the porch, listening to the crickets. The cool Oregon air brushed against my face, and I realized, maybe this was the moment every parent fears. The moment your child stops seeing you as wise and starts seeing you as outdated. But what Emily didn't know was that sometimes life teaches lessons far more painfully than any mother ever could. And when that day came, when she finally saw the truth, I would be there. Not to say, "I told you so," but to remind her that no matter how far she fell, her mother's love would still be waiting. Because what happened next changed both our lives forever. When Emily moved to Seattle to start her business, I told her I'd help however I could. But she brushed it off. "Mom, I've got this," she said, smiling confidently as she loaded boxes of her things into her car. Her tone was soft but firm, the kind of finality that tells you your advice isn't welcome anymore. So I stood there on the porch, waving as her car disappeared down the road. The same road she'd once learned to ride her bike on, now taking her into a life where I no longer fit. Weeks passed. Our calls became shorter. Sometimes she wouldn't answer for days. When she did, her voice was hurried, distracted. "I'm in a meeting, Mom. Can we talk later?" And later never came. Then one morning, I got an email from her. Not a call, not a visit, an email. It said, "Hey Mom, I did it. I quit my job. Signed a small office lease downtown. My brand consultancy is officially live. Wilson and Company." I stared at that name, Wilson and Company. A piece of me smiled. Another part worried deeply. I replied right away, asking if she needed any financial help to get started. She replied in one line.
No, Mom.
I told you. I'm doing this my way. So I stayed silent. But every night, I thought about her, sitting alone in that big city, with rent, bills, and dreams bigger than her savings. A few months later, I decided to visit her. I told her I'd bring her some homemade soup, her favorite, chicken and corn chowder. When I arrived at her office, I was surprised. It wasn't what I imagined. A cramped space above a coffee shop, with one flickering light and an old desk pushed against the wall. Emily sat there with her laptop, surrounded by sticky notes, coffee cups, and the smell of exhaustion. Emily, I said softly, setting the soup on her desk. She looked up, startled, almost embarrassed.
Mom.
What are you doing here? I just wanted to see you. You look tired. She exhaled, rubbing her temples.
I've fine.
Just busy. Things are picking up. But her eyes told the truth she wouldn't say. On the wall behind her, I saw unpaid invoices pinned up. A calendar full of crossed-out client meetings. I wanted to ask, are you okay? But she would have only heard, I told you so. So instead, I smiled and said, I brought you lunch. Eat it while it's warm. She sighed, hugged me quickly, and whispered, Thanks, Mom. And for a moment, she wasn't the grown woman building a business. She was my little girl again. A few weeks later, I got another call. Her voice trembled. Mom, I think I made a mistake. My heart stopped. She explained that her biggest client, the one paying most of her bills, had backed out. The office rent was due. Her small team had quit. And now, she was drowning in debt. I wanted to drive to Seattle that very moment, write her a check, fix everything. But something inside me, that quiet, painful instinct only mothers understand, told me not to. Because if I saved her again, she'd never learn that sometimes falling isn't the end. It's the start of growing up, even at 32. So I took a deep breath and said gently, Emily, I'm so sorry this happened, but you're strong enough to get through it. There was silence on the other end. Then she said bitterly, Mom, I don't need a lecture right now. I'm not lecturing, honey. I'm just here. That night, I sat by my window, watching the rain pour over the garden. I kept replaying her words. You're too old to understand. Maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't understand her world. The apps, the startups, the endless rush for success. But I did understand something deeper. That pride can destroy more dreams than failure ever will. And as her life began to crumble, I made a painful decision. I would let her fail. Not because I wanted to see her hurt, but because sometimes love means stepping back, even when every instinct in your body screams to step forward. And soon, that decision would be tested in ways I could never imagine. I didn't hear from Emily for almost a month after that call. Not a text. Not a word. Every morning, I'd check my phone, nothing. Every evening, I'd tell myself she was busy rebuilding, that she'd call when things got better. But deep down, I knew things had gotten worse. One rainy afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail, addressed in handwriting I knew too well. It was Emily's. Inside was a folded eviction notice, a letter from the landlord, and beneath it a small note that simply read, Mom, I don't know what to do anymore. I sat there for a long time, holding that piece of paper, feeling my heart shatter in silence. I wanted to rush to her, fix everything like I always did. But I reminded myself of the promise I'd made, to let her find her own strength. Still, that night I couldn't sleep. I packed a few groceries, her favorite blanket, and drove to Seattle. When I reached her apartment, it was dark and quiet. I knocked softly. Emily? It's Mom. No answer. After a few moments, I heard shuffling inside. The door opened, and there she was, my confident, unstoppable daughter, standing in a wrinkled hoodie, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Mom, she whispered, voice trembling. I didn't want you to see me like this. I stepped inside, and my heart sank. The place was a mess. Empty pizza boxes, unopened mail, her laptop lying cracked on the table. She tried to smile. Guess I'm not as good at running a business as I thought. I didn't say a word. I just took her hand, warm and shaking, and said, "It's okay to fail, honey. Everyone does." Her lips trembled. "But you don't understand, Mom." People laughed at me. My old coworkers saw my post online. They said I was stupid to leave my job. They were right. I wanted to tell her, no, they weren't. But her pain was too raw to fix with words. Over the next few days, I stayed with her quietly, cooked her meals, helped her clean up, sat beside her without judgment. She'd wake up some mornings crying, saying, "I ruined everything, Mom." And I'd softly reply,
No, Emily.
"You just took a wrong turn. You can still find your way." But every time I tried to encourage her, she'd shake her head. "You just don't get it, Mom. You don't know what it's like to lose everything." And that was when I finally broke. I looked at her and said gently, "Emily, I may not understand your world, but I do understand loss. I lost your father when I was only 40. I lost friends, dreams, even parts of myself. But I never let loss define who I was. You shouldn't either." She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in months. Her eyes softened. The next morning, I found her sitting by the window, laptop open. "I'm applying for jobs again," she said quietly. "I think I need to start over." I smiled. That's my girl. But then she looked at me and said something that pierced my heart. "Mom, I don't know how you do it, how you stay so calm, so strong, even when I pushed you away." I took her hand and whispered, "Because, Emily, love doesn't expire with age. You may think I'm too old to understand, but age teaches you one thing, patience. Sometimes, the best way to love someone is to let them fall and trust they'll rise." Tears filled her eyes, and she whispered,
I'm sorry, Mom.
I was so arrogant. "I thought you didn't get me, but maybe I didn't get you." That moment, watching her finally open her heart, it felt like the sun breaking through months of rain. But what neither of us knew was that the hardest test was yet to come. Because when you rebuild your life, the world doesn't make it easy. And soon, Emily would face a choice, one that would show her the real meaning of responsibility, love, and truth. After that morning, something changed in Emily. She started getting up early again, fixing her hair, tidying her apartment, making lists. There was light in her eyes I hadn't seen in months. She told me she'd found a temporary marketing job with a small local company. "It's not glamorous," she said, "but it's a start." And I smiled because sometimes a start is all a broken soul needs. Every evening after work, she'd call me, sometimes for advice, sometimes just to talk. And I'd listen, quietly proud that she was finally letting me back into her life. Weeks turned into months. The clouds over her began to clear. But life has a way of testing us just when we think we've survived the storm. One evening, Emily called me, her voice shaking. "Mom, I got an offer." "That's wonderful, honey," I said, smiling into the phone. She hesitated. "It's from a big firm in downtown Seattle, Sterling and Gates. They offered me twice what I'm making now." But what?" I asked. "They want me to bring over the client list from my current job. You know, the one I've been building for them. They said it would prove my value." I froze. "Emily, that's stealing." "I know, Mom, but everyone does it. And they said they'd make me a manager right away if I did." There was silence. I could almost hear her heartbeat through the phone. I took a deep breath. "Emily, remember what failure taught you? That shortcuts don't build foundations, they break them." Her tone hardened. "Mom, you don't understand business. This is how the real world works." Those words again, "you don't understand." But this time, I didn't argue. I simply said, "Then, my dear, do what you believe is right. But remember, you're the one who is to live with the reflection in the mirror." And I hung up, my hands trembling. For days, I didn't hear from her. I prayed every night that she'd make the right choice. Then one Friday morning, I got a call from her manager. "Mrs. Wilson, I thought you should know your daughter made an honorable decision. She refused the other firm's offer and came clean about it to us." My eyes filled with tears. She did.
Yes.
It cost her that new opportunity, but We were impressed by her honesty. We've decided to promote her instead. I thanked him, my voice cracking, and hung up, my heart swelling with pride. That evening, Emily showed up at my doorstep. No phone call, no warning. Just her standing there, tired, teary-eyed, but smiling. "Mom," she whispered. "I almost did it. I almost took the easy way. But then I heard your voice in my head. You were right, again." I pulled her into my arms. "Oh, sweetheart. You didn't need to understand me. You just needed to remember what I taught you." She laughed through her tears. "I used to think you were old-fashioned, but maybe you were just wise." That night, we sat on the porch, the same porch where I once cried alone, feeling replaced and misunderstood. But now, the air felt different.
Softer.
Full of peace. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I don't know how you stayed patient with me all this time." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because one day I knew you'd understand. Not my age, not my ways, but my heart." The stars shone above us, quiet witnesses to the long road that had brought us back together. I looked at her and said softly, "You know, Emily, maybe you were right about one thing. I am old. But being old means I've seen enough of life to know that failure isn't the end. It's the beginning of wisdom." She squeezed my hand, and I think I just found mine. But even as we sat there, healed and whole again, I couldn't help but think. Sometimes, the hardest lessons aren't the ones life teaches us. They're the ones we must watch our children learn on their own. A few months later, Emily decided to move back home for a while. She said she wanted a break from the city. But I knew she was really coming home to heal. The day she arrived, I had her old room ready. The floral curtains, the bookshelf filled with her childhood novels, even her stuffed bear sitting on the bed. When she saw it, she smiled through tears. "Mom, you kept all of this?" I nodded. "Some things are worth keeping, even when the world calls them old." She hugged me tightly, and I could feel her heart finally at peace. Over the following weeks, our home was full again, full of laughter, late-night talks, and the smell of morning coffee. We'd sit on the porch every evening, watching the sun melt behind the Oregon hills. Sometimes she'd talk about her plans, maybe to start a smaller business someday, maybe to just live simpler for a while. But what mattered most was how she spoke, not with arrogance, but with gratitude. One evening, as the sky turned pink and gold, she turned to me and said softly, "Mom, I used to think strength meant never needing help. I thought being independent meant shutting you out. But now I see, it's about knowing when to lean on someone who loves you." I smiled, trying to hold back tears. "You didn't fail, Emily. You just grew up the hard way." She laughed quietly. "And you let me. That must have been so hard." It was, I admitted, every day. "But if I had rescued you, you would have never rescued yourself." She reached for my hand and said, "I used to think you were out of touch, Mom. But you weren't behind the times, you were ahead of me." Those words, they healed something deep inside me. Something I didn't even realize was still broken. A week later, she surprised me with something beautiful. She showed me her new website, a mentorship blog for young women starting their careers. At the top of the page, the title read, "Old Enough to Understand." I looked at her, eyes wide. "That's what you're calling it?" She grinned.
"Yeah."
"Because you taught me that age doesn't make you irrelevant. It makes you wiser. And I want to share that with others." I could barely speak. Pride filled every corner of my heart. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, holding a cup of tea. Outside, the world was quiet, just the hum of crickets and the whisper of the wind. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt whole. Because being a mother isn't about being understood every moment. It's about loving your child enough to wait, patiently, silently, until they understand you on their own. I looked up at the framed photo on the wall, me holding baby Emily in my arms, both of us laughing. And I whispered, "You finally saw the truth, my girl, that love doesn't age. It only grows stronger." So if you're listening to this and you're a parent who feels unseen or unheard, remember this. Your wisdom may be ignored today, but one day it will echo in the heart of your child. And when it does, they'll finally see you the way you always saw them, with love, patience, and hope. Sometimes you have to let the people you love make their own mistakes, not because you've stopped caring, but because you care enough to let them learn. True understanding doesn't come from youth. It comes from love.